Welcome to the MacArthur Memorial podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Williams. Join me as we explore the life and legacy of General of the Army Douglas MacArthur and discuss a wide range of military history topics from the American Civil War to the Korean War. Welcome. My name is Amanda Williams, and I'm here with Jim Zobel, and we are both historians here at the MacArthur Memorial. And today we're going to be talking about Douglas MacArthur's time in the Corps of Engineers. And we're going to talk about this service today, and then we're going to invite you to leave questions about it in the comment section of this video on whatever platform you're viewing this. And then in about a week, we will be back to try to answer some of those questions. So are you ready, Jim?
As ready as I can be.
Okay, well, that's good. So Douglas MacArthur, he is in the Corps of Engineers from 1903, so from graduation, West Point, to 1917, when he joins the 42nd Division during World War I. Was this a normal path? Was the Corps of Engineers a very normal path for like top West Point grads in 1903?
That's what it had been, for quite a while. The West Point's really greatest strength as far as academics was an engineering degree. And so that's where your top grads go usually. It was to the engineering school. Now is it normal for him to go from there to infantry? That's kind of a rare thing. That big skip, especially after 14 years, I think, of being in the engineers. But yeah, as far as West Point goes, that was kind of normal for the top people to go engineers.
I feel like a lot of his biographers treat it as of course this was going to happen. He was top of his class. Of course, this was going to be the direction that he went in terms of branch. But I didn't know if that was like something that was required or if it was something that you did have some say in back then.
That I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do some more research on that one.
Sure.
So after graduation, he's this engineer. His first assignment is in the Philippines. And this is right after the Philippine-American War. And there's still obviously some things happening there. What kinds of engineering projects is the U.S. Army tackling there? And what does MacArthur actually do there?
Well, they make him the chief of the engineers in the district of the Visayas, which is those middle islands below Luzon. And from what we know, he builds the docks at Tacloban because when he goes back in 44, he recognizes, the work that he did there. We know that he does those docks down at Guimaras, which is in Iloilo Harbor of Panay, because that's where he gets in the gunfight with the two bandits in the forest, and that they were there getting wood to use for those docks there. And I think part of those docks in Panay are still there. There's a guy that contacts us all the time that has like a MacArthur related museum type thing down there because of that. So he's kind of responsible for getting these projects done, these projects built around the Visayan area. It seems most of the biographers talk about it from what they can glean. They glean this Tacloban experience as well as this Panay experience, but he's only there for about a year. And then he's back in Manila for like the last couple of months of his time there. So I think he's, works maybe like about 9 months on these engineering projects down in the Visayas, but then he's back in Manila. And is it malaria? Does he get malaria?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he gets, but that's why he gets sent home from there after a year. I think his time there was cut short, maybe a little bit.
Yeah. So biographer D. Clayton James has a chapter entitled The Travels and Tribulations of a Young Engineer. And just, wow. Tell us about these tribulations.
Well, of course, we know he gets in those gunfights in 2003 down at Guimaras with the Filipinos, and then he's with the army there in Mexico in 1914 while he's still an engineer officer. So, I mean, those are some of the, would be, I think, some of the highlights of it. But, he does the tour of Asia during that time with his dad. He also goes to the engineer school. He's the aide to President Roosevelt. He works on all these projects up in Milwaukee. He gets in a lot of trouble with, his superiors at the engineer school. He gets in a lot of trouble with his superiors at in Milwaukee. Then he goes to Leavenworth and he's superior to everybody and everybody really likes him. And the same people that reprimanded him, for his earlier things are the ones that then, give him praise for being such a great officer. So I guess James is talking about that, these ups and downs. It seems the thing that really kind of messes him up more than anything is girls, that's the whole time he's chasing girls everywhere and he keeps getting they don't want anything to do with him and it drives him crazy. There in Washington when he's at the engineer school and then when he's there in Milwaukee, he's got another one that he's going crazy for, writing all these poems to and everything. So he's
Yeah.
a young guy who's kind of experiencing everything, you know what I mean?
I guess he is ill a few times because of the malaria, but it does seem that he gets very discouraged and even probably a little depressed. I mean, I'm not diagnosing him, I have no ability to do that, but it does seem that very distracted, very depressed at times, and just not interested in doing the work that he's been assigned. And yet it seems that the people that he works for, while he may drive them crazy, they do tend to recognize he has an incredible ability. He's just not applying himself. But
Well, and you look at the poems to Fannie Belle Stewart, the girl that, he's crazy about in Milwaukee when he's up there. And there are all these stories about him being this infantry officer, in these
right.
incredible battles, and it's not the life of an engineer.
No.
And I mean when he's up there in Milwaukee, it's like, okay, it's the middle of winter, go build these docks
Mhm.
in Manitowoc or and he's like, no, I'm staying here in
Yeah.
Milwaukee and I'm going to finish the studies that I didn't do at the engineer school. So it's almost like, I'm going to do it my way,
Right.
and I'll get all these things done, and I'll do what I need to do for you. But, it just seems like but then when he goes to Leavenworth and he has that engineer group, he excels at that because he's
Right.
he's leading men there and they, that's something that he's really, that's when I think that everybody sees, okay, this is
Yeah.
what this guy is great at.
Because that's his first real command, right?
Yeah, aside
Big
from,
first
like,
big, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think so, where he's got a company of engineers.
Hmm.
And it supposedly turns it from the worst group into the best group,
Hmm.
there at Leavenworth. And then
Yeah.
at Leavenworth, he's doing all those different jobs as like commissary officer, provost marshal. So, I mean, he's getting a massive amount of experience, as a engineer officer and how to run bases as well. And then when he goes to be with Leonard Wood, he's running that State War
Hmm.
Naval building, and he's like
Right.
the manager of the building. So I mean, he's getting a lot of experience and he's getting a lot of combat experience too. So it is like James said, the trials and travels of a young engineer officer.
Now, I want to go back just a little bit because James calls one of the little sections in that chapter the Brink of Oblivion.
Right.
I just love all these little subtitles and chapter titles. But so just going back a bit. So you did mention he goes on that trip to Asia and then he comes back and then he's assigned to engineer school at Washington Barracks and that's in DC, right?
Right. Right.
Right in DC. Okay.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
And then this is a very coveted appointment for a young officer. But he, as you've mentioned, loses interest, is distracted, but he also ends up spending time, like you said, in the White House, in
Yeah.
Theodore Roosevelt's White House. So that doesn't seem like the brink of oblivion to me to be in the White House with Theodore Roosevelt as what, a young lieutenant?
Yeah.
So
I
why
think
why is
he
that the
I
brink
think
of
he's
oblivion?
talking I think he's talking more about that Milwaukee episode because
Okay.
William Judson really makes a stink about MacArthur there because he's
Yeah.
not doing what he's supposed to be doing and Judson calls him a complainer
Mhm.
and somebody always trying to get out of work, but then the what happens is he gets transferred to the Leavenworth by the chief of staff, J. Franklin Bell, who's a friend of Arthur MacArthur's. Now does Arthur MacArthur go to Bell and say, "Look, my kid's having all these troubles with this guy in Milwaukee. We need to get him out of here." Nobody knows that. But the chief of staff, directs him to go to Leavenworth. And when he gets to Leavenworth, that's when the report comes from Judson, the guy who's in Milwaukee, his commander. And he sends that to the chief of engineers. And then MacArthur, in his rebuttal, he doesn't send it back to Judson. He sends it to the chief of engineers, just totally, out of protocol and everything else, and so it's almost like he's on the brink of oblivion, about to sink his own career, because of that. But then at Leavenworth, he does so well, with that company of engineers. He becomes the demolitions instructor for Fort Riley, the cavalry school. They all think he's the greatest. And even his mom thinks he's about to lose the position in the army. And so she gets E.F. Harriman's railroad people to start, questioning, how to get MacArthur out of the army and into the railroad. And when MacArthur finds that out, he's like, what the, I don't want to do that at all. So I think even his mom was like, oh boy, this isn't going to work out for him, in the thing. But, then when the chief of the engineers, William Marshall, is the guy that MacArthur sends his rebuttal, to Judson's things to. But then at Leavenworth, the highest praise that he gets is from William Marshall, that chief of engineers. So it's like I was saying, the people that reprimanded him then are like, boy, you're the greatest, and that's what everybody at Leavenworth really kind of thought, because he was capable at everything. He got all his work done. And, is it because he's more interested in that? Who knows? Who
Yeah.
knows? But, it's like going from the pinnacle of being a slacker to, the pinnacle of being in the middle of it. And then that's what really, gets him picked by Leonard Wood, along with his mom being sick, to go to Washington,
Yeah.
and be his aide and then be on the general staff. So, I mean, it all worked out pretty good.
Sometimes I think the trip to Asia with his father and mother, I think that was a very exciting point in his early career. I think that first assignment in the Philippines in 1903 was very exciting too. I think everything that followed that, in some ways, maybe even the White House too, was kind of disappointing in a way. Or maybe he's looking at his brother Arthur's career and thinking his career is a lot more exciting right now than mine, me in Milwaukee, me in these other places. But that I've often wondered if, like, watching his brother's career in the Navy and him comparing it maybe made him a little dissatisfied too. But I think you're right about the girls too. But
Maybe,
I'm just throwing one
maybe.
more idea
Yeah.
out. But
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. But it's like we've always said, he is the pace setter, so he would be looking at him, yeah,
mhm.
in that
Yeah.
sense.
And his brother's also making headway in terms of, I guess, his personal life, getting married, having a family, probably things that, Douglas MacArthur feels frustrated in, because obviously he has a lot of problems with the girls. So,
Yeah.
but
The one thing that we don't know much about those, that trip to Panama for the Panama Canal and what he actually does down there, because I think he's down there for, a couple of
mhm.
months,
Yeah,
whatnot. And that's where he, then meets that other girl.
right. Well, there we go again. But
Yeah.
no, but you're right. All his biographers are kind of light on that topic, but that does seem to be another one of those kind of interesting times for him.
Well,
But
the guy who builds the head engineer, Gethels, is that it?
you got
I
me.
forget. Well, he becomes real, he works with him pretty close, the guy that's putting that together. So I mean, it's got to be an amazing experience for him.
Mhm.
But, it's just he didn't talk about it much, and we don't know much about it.
All right. So you mentioned that he is going to go work in the office of the chief of staff. So tell us how that
Mhm.
happens, and then, what are his duties as an engineer during that time?
Well, I think that's where he kind of gets out of that engineer work. He's still in the branch, but it's
Okay.
it's he's doing the duties of the general staff, because Leonard Wood, when Arthur dies in 1912, his mom is sickly. His mom is sickly for the last 40 years of her life, basically. But Leonard Wood says if we bring her to Washington, she'll be more accessible to Walter Reed Hospital and things like that. And then, so as well, Leonard Wood says, okay, well, I'll make Douglas MacArthur my aide. And that's where he recognizes, boy, this kid's really got it on the ball, and MacArthur pours everything into that. And everybody there, I think, starts to think, you got a problem, this guy will solve it for you. And that's why Wood picks MacArthur to go to Veracruz in 1914, because he wants eyes and ears on the ground. MacArthur he trusts. MacArthur he knows has a reputation for boldness, so to speak. So, I mean, I think that he fits right in there. And then after he runs that State War Naval building we were talking about, he becomes one of the 38 members of the general staff. So then he's working for, problems with the Army itself, rather than like engineer work.
So when and why does he switch branches?
Well, the war comes along and that's what Newton Baker, the chief of staff or the secretary of war, who got real close with MacArthur when they create the Rainbow Division. He knows he wants to be, part of that. He says, I can get you a commission in the infantry, or do you want to stay in the engineers? And MacArthur chooses that,
Okay.
to be in the infantry. But when before he gets chief of staff, Hoover offers him the office of the chief of engineers. Even though he's been an infantry officer since 1917, you
Mhm.
get to 1928, and Hoover was gonna offer him that
Okay.
one, and MacArthur doesn't want it.
All
Yeah,
right.
he
So
doesn't want the
so
chief
what
of
in the
engineers.
1920s after World War One, Hoover offers that.
I think it's right before the chief of staff offer comes in, to be chief of staff of
Okay.
the army. So it's only like right before that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So, do we see lessons or experience from his time as an engineer in his leadership or decision making in World War One or later wars? And does his time as an engineer impact his relationship with his own chief engineers?
I think that the experience comes in real well for World War One, just because running that company of engineers, he knows how to run people, how to work with people,
Hmm.
and like I said before, I think that's what most people saw as MacArthur's forte, is being able to influence people or get the most out of them. Because I've met a lot of those guys that said they were around MacArthur at the time, and they would be in a sense like not, wow, that guy's really cool. It's like he makes me feel 10 times better about myself, than I felt 5 minutes ago. And that's really the magic of MacArthur,
Right.
is that ability to instill within others their belief that they can do the job, that they can do the job. And I think that comes a lot from that engineer experience, with working all those people, then with, as well on Leavenworth, where he does have all those different posts that he has to work with, different branches of
Mhm.
the army throughout, as both an instructor as well as like the commissary officer, to figure out how am I going to feed all these people here, in that sense. So I mean, I think the whole experience is something for him. And then as well on Gamaris and at Veracruz, he realizes he's able to stifle fear.
I just didn't know if it's like a situation, like we've got moments in World War II where, if you're a brigade commander or maybe you've got a division, he's been in those shoes before. And if he comes by, like there's a sense like, oh gosh, he's looking over my shoulder. He knows how to do this maybe better
Right.
than me. I didn't know if, later on any engineers felt like, oh gosh, he gets a lot of this stuff too. And he's looking over my shoulder.
Hugh Casey is his engineer officer in World War II,
Hmm.
and they speak the same language, and they get along very well. But Casey, is not averse to pointing out MacArthur's flaws as an engineer, because when they're in New Guinea, MacArthur's like, well, why don't we just build a road from this place to this place, in New Guinea, and it's across swamps and rivers and everything else, and Casey is just like, just
Can't
stop,
do. Yeah.
just But I'll do the job, just let me take care of this. And
Yeah.
I think MacArthur was like, yeah, I get it. That's nothing off me.
Yeah.
These are my experts. It's like with Leaf Sverdrup, you build the airfields. I'll get you there, but you build the airfields.
Right. Yeah. He's not a micromanager. So
No, not in that sense.
not if
Yeah.
you're competent, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
all right. So the Corps of Engineers, the castle, that logo insignia. And in 1903, MacArthur was given a gold set of this insignia by his family. So probably as a graduation present. Is it true that since 1975, the Chief of Engineers of the U.S. Army has worn MacArthur's gold castles?
That's what I've always heard
Okay.
is that
How did they survive
I've
the
seen
Philippines?
that. I don't know. I don't,
Okay.
were they in there with the medals that Gene grabs, or are
Yeah.
they somewhere else?
What I've
I
read is that
don't know.
Sverdrup is the one that gave them to the chief of engineers in 1975, and that MacArthur had given his gold castles to Sverdrup at some point as a gift.
Really?
So that would, I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah, I
that
didn't know that.
no, but I mean, that
Right.
is apparently the chief of engineers today wears MacArthur's 1903 gold castles. So, because they're not in our collection, but obviously they
Right.
survived
Right.
the fall of the Philippines at the start of World War II. So that would be really cool, though.
Yeah, I don't know how they survived, because they would have had to have been taken out of the apartment
Mhm.
in Manila to Corregidor and then to Australia, and he doesn't give them to Casey, he gives them to Sverdrup.
That's the story. I've read it in a couple different places.
Yeah.
Apparently it's quite the tradition, but like I said, we don't have a record of those ever being in our collection, and we're
No.
not too clear exactly what Jean took out. We have some things in the collection that we know she had to have taken out. She mentions a couple of items, but I mean, they're as small
Yeah.
as they are, it's entirely possible she threw those in the bag too, but she does not mention them.
Well, I mean, if they have the medals, that she saves,
Hmm.
you would think that they were probably in a little case or something, maybe,
Probably. Yeah.
and maybe the other insignia was in there. Who
Mhm.
knows?
Yeah. But I
Who
think
knows?
that's really interesting to
So do I.
that there's this possibility that these are MacArthur's gold castles and they, continue in service in a way. So, all right. Any final thoughts on MacArthur as an engineer, Jim?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, as we
Ask a lot of questions, though.
yes, please ask a lot of questions about MacArthur's time in the engineers. Put those questions in the comment section. And in about a week, we will be back and we will do our best to answer those questions. All right. So until then, take care. Stay tuned. When we originally released this program, we used our social media platforms to ask our listeners for questions about this topic. What follows is that Q&A. And once again, you have delivered, and we have some great questions, and let's start answering some of those. First question. Did MacArthur specialize in a specific type of engineering while he was with the Corps of Engineers?
Well, it's mostly like civil engineering because he's doing docks and
Mhm.
bridges and things like that, and military engineer specializes in demolitions as well. So I mean,
Right.
he's doing a lot of those things, but when he goes to the engineer school, I mean, did they get into different kinds of mechanical engineering and electrical engineering and all that. I'm not sure. But, from what he was building at the time, it seems more like a civil engineer.
Yeah. Broad range of military and then civil infrastructure kind of related projects. All right. Did MacArthur apply his engineering background to any specific instances in his later career during World War I, World War II, and Korea?
In World War One, he'll turn the engineers into infantry. And so they're doing their work. But at the Ork River there in July of 1918, he turns the 117th Engineers into infantry in that chase from the Ork to that next river. So I mean, he wants them to be, like combat engineers.
Mhm.
During World War II, Casey, was his engineer, very good at what he was doing. And I think MacArthur relied on him a lot. It's like we were saying in the thing we did, where
Mhm.
MacArthur's like, let's just build a road across New Guinea, and Casey
Right.
was just like,
No.
just be quiet.
Right.
So, but in Korea, the engineers are very important in
Mhm.
getting the Marines out of Chosin, when they have to drop
Mhm.
those bridges there, and they have to, do the work there. So, I mean, it's,
Do you think it gives him like a certain ability to imagine solutions in the sense of, I'm sure there's a technology, I'm sure there's a bridge is there a way to get from here to here? What do we've got? Like, do you think it gives him this idea that there's definitely this box of ideas we can open up to find our way out of problems?
well, I think he learns in World War II, especially, about airfield construction, because that's
Mhm.
the main thing.
Yeah.
When they go into all these places, they have to build a new airfield out of basically,
Yeah.
jungle or some coral island somewhere. So I mean, it's especially in New Guinea, it's an engineer's war,
Right.
really. So
So
it's
he's not personally figuring out like the
yeah.
math and stuff and the materials, but he understands maybe better than some
And
people.
that's also in that book, that military demolitions, that the commander in chief has to understand the work
Right.
of the engineer, when things have to take place, if things
Yeah.
take place too early, too soon. So it's all part of that whole,
Yeah.
war plan, and they're very important to everything. If you don't,
Yeah.
the Japanese, when the Americans go in, they've got, all these bulldozers and everything. Japanese engineers were rolling, you know,
Mhm.
airfields with those, old
Weights.
rolling weight
Yeah.
drums. And so it's a very much something that they put a
Right.
lot of money and effort into, is the engineer corps.
Yeah. I've always thought too, in terms of all of those amphibious operations that he is, planning and executing, you have to know a lot about terrain. You have to know a lot about getting around obstacles, so I almost wonder if it's not, the only thing that helps. But again, it's that thing in the back of his mind where he understands how to get around things.
Sure. And he learns early, because the first people that are sent up to Port Moresby are engineers.
Oh,
Before they have like some anti-aircraft people have,
yeah.
but before infantry even get there, you've got engineers up there,
Mm.
building airfields.
Okay. Next question. Was it usual for engineers to come under fire like MacArthur was when he was attacked in the Philippines or during any other conflict?
Well, sure. I mean, engineer. It's not like they're in the back. I
Right.
mean, they're right in the middle of it. And
Yeah.
he, again, in that book that he writes, he points out, all these different examples from history, like the Battle of Leipzig, where the bridge got blown too early, and then the French can't get out of Leipzig. Poniatowski gets killed in the river and what. Now, and then he points all these other examples during history when the engineers were, critical to what. I mean, look at Napoleon at the Berezina.
Mhm.
I mean, the engineers all die of basically hypothermia from being in the water trying to keep that bridge open there. I mean, you get into Normandy and all the guys building all the mulberries and everything. So I mean, it's
A
not like,
dangerous job.
yeah, it's not like you're in the back not getting shelled and everything else.
Don't we have pictures? I feel like in one of the MacArthur reports, you did something on New Guinea. And don't we have pictures of like bulldozers that look semi-armored or
Well,
something?
yeah,
Like
and
they're
that was
using something to try to protect.
in that Battle of the Villa Verde
Yes.
and the Battle of Balete Pass, when
Oh,
they're having to
okay.
build that road up in those, they make cages,
So
because
the
because
Philippines.
their snipers are taking those guys out. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right, next question. Leonard Wood didn't notify anyone of MacArthur's mission when he was sent to Veracruz in 1914, including his commanding officer.
No, they did. I mean, it was in the newspaper that MacArthur
Was going there.
was going to Veracruz, and they called him a lieutenant when he was already a captain. So I imagine he was pretty ticked off about that. But they announced the ship he was going down on and everything. So I mean, it was well known
But
he
they
was
don't
going
know
down there.
what his
No,
secret mission is.
yeah, I mean, he's the eyes and ears of wood. And when he gets there, he reports to Funston, that, I'm here as a special agent of Leonard Wood, and lets him know that. So, I mean, it wasn't really too secret, but the mission that he cooks up to go look for those locomotives, that's something that's, wasn't really spelled out. That's what he was supposed to do, but he realized that was something that was critically important. And so then, goes on that, and Funston finds out afterward, in that sense. So he doesn't know they go on the locomotive mission, but he knows he's down there working for Leonard Wood.
This is not one of the questions, but how does Wood react to that locomotive mission?
Well, he doesn't know about it until MacArthur gets back, because that I think it was in May or something. He's there for like till the end of summer, and nothing gets back to Washington about this thing until that guy Constant Cordier, who was the provost marshal, wrote to the chief of staff, who I think was Hugh Scott at that time, and Leonard Wood saying, MacArthur deserves the Medal of Honor for this. And then that's when they go, what happened down there? And that's when MacArthur writes the report that then goes to them.
Yeah, that's another topic for another time. Okay. Do we know how his parents reacted to MacArthur entering the Corps of Engineers instead of another pathway when he graduated from West Point?
I don't know. I mean, they're definitely proud he's the top grad, at West Point. Later on, when things aren't working out too well, 1911, that's when his mom, like we were saying the other day, tries to get the Harriman Railroad people to entice him into being in the railroads because she thinks he's not going to work out. Yeah, in the Army at that point.
Yeah, but at that point, it's kind of a merit-based. You get to, if you're top in the class, you get first pick. It doesn't change until more recently, I think.
Yeah, and were the engineers, was that a faster promotion rate? Okay.
That's what I read.
That's probably a lot to do with
the top grads would usually try to pick Corps of Engineers because, yes, the promotions were. It was a little bit.
Well, his parents probably realized that as well. Who knows? Maybe they influenced him to take that.
But no, we don't. I mean, we know, according to the stories, that they gave him his first set of castles, the gold castles, we think.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously a nice gift like that, they're very proud of the fact that that's his brand. All right. Last question. Douglas MacArthur wrote a military demolitions manual as a young lieutenant in 1908. Can you tell us more about this manual?
I mean, he goes into all the different type of explosives, how to destroy bridges, how to destroy railroad lines, the necessity of doing these kind of things, like I was saying before, where he talks about the commander-in-chief has to know when to use, demolitions and whatnot. He talks about, nitro. He talks about dynamite. He talks about all these different type of explosives. Then he talks about demolishing things without explosives, and how you do it in that sense. So it's a very thorough explanation of all the things that a military engineer doing demolitions will have to. And that's why the people at the infantry school and the cavalry school thought he was so awesome and were, just highly praiseworthy of when he was teaching the demolitions to both of those schools. So, I mean, the piece is really interesting. If you want to know how to blow something up, it's something to start with.
And it
doesn't tell you how to make everything, but
it's not designed necessarily for a very specialized engineer. It's designed to be used and to teach.
Well, it teaches everybody. Yeah, sure, everything about demolitions. Yeah.
So, and that's the first thing he publishes.
Yeah, that and the reminiscences. Yeah,
he only has 2 publications in his entire life.
Yeah, he doesn't write anything else.
All right. Well, that was the last question.
Oh, okay.
Those were good questions. And this is our last sit down for 2025. And I think we will be back next year with a pretty nice lineup of virtual events and Q&A sessions. So looking forward to some great topics. And until then, thank you all for joining us and for helping us to explore different parts of General MacArthur's life and legacy. And we will see you next year. And thank you, Jim, for...
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions, the MacArthur Memorial team wants to hear from you. You can reach us at macarthurmemorial@norfolk.gov or find us on X at MacArthur1880 or on Facebook and Instagram as MacArthur Memorial.